Hello, and welcome to Dramatic Cookbook Readings. I am your host as we navigate through the intensely intriguing world of cookbooks. Today, we will be reading Cooking for Jeffrey, a Barefoot Contessa cookbook. Intro. When I give talks, I'm often asked what I make when I'm cooking just for myself. Truthfully, the answer is not much. After all, I spend most of my days developing, testing, and retesting recipes for my cookbooks. So when dinner rolls around, I'm very happy with a bowl of homemade soup or a tuna on rye from the deli. For me, cooking has always been as much about making people happy as it has been about satisfying a hunger pang. Cooking is more gratifying and, frankly, more fun when I'm cooking for people I love, whether for two friends or a party of 12. And for more than 40 years, my most constant and appreciative audience has been my sweet husband, Jeffrey. When I was growing up, I always wanted to cook, but was never allowed in the kitchen. My mother used to say, "It's my job to cook, and your job to study." I secretly think that my mother considered the kitchen her personal space, and she wasn't crazy about me making a mess or rearranging her pots and pans. So the minute I married Jeffrey, I bought Craig Claiborne's The New York Times Cookbook and worked my way through the recipes until the book was coming apart at the seams. I made things Jeffrey loved: spinach and feta strudel, chili con carne, shrimp curry, along with lots of decadent desserts like chocolate chiffon pie and crepe Suzette. Though our tastes have certainly changed over the years, many of these early dishes have inspired the recipes in my cookbooks. I loved the challenge of tackling a new dish, and more complicated the recipe, the better. I remember one of the first things I tried was a braided challah egg bread for Friday night dinner. Not the easiest thing to make. All these years after, I'm still making challah, but with my own easier version of that recipe. Challah with saffron, page 173. Working away in my own kitchen for the first time, I was in heaven. I found mastering a difficult recipe in the creative part of cooking incredibly satisfying. Just as important to me, though, was that Jeffrey loved everything I cooked. His enthusiasm truly fueled the fire. I was making a home for us, which made me happy, and taking care of the love of my life. It was Jeffrey who first encouraged me to turn what I considered more of a hobby or pastime into my career. When he and I had been married for less than a year, he came home one day and found me sitting on the sofa watching That Girl on TV. In case you don't remember the show, Marlo Thomas played a young, independent working woman living on her own in New York City at a time when most single women that age were expected to live at home. Jeffrey turned to me and said, "You need to do something with your life, or you'll never be happy." That stopped me short. I thought I was living the dream. I was married to the man I loved. But in time, I realized he was right. And his words started me on a journey that has led to a life and happiness beyond any I could have imagined. I already loved to cook for Jeffrey, but he helped me realize I could do more with that interest. I often say that he was the first feminist I ever knew. He believed that I could do anything I wanted to do. He's the reason I love to cook, and also the person who continually encourages me to do what I love. It was Jeffrey who encouraged me to leave my job in government when I needed to find something more exciting and creative. He said, "Pick something you love to do. If you love it, you'll be really good at it." When I came across an ad for a little specialty food store in the Hamptons, I knew I found that thing. This was 1978, in an era when women were starting to work full-time and needed help getting dinner on the table. The idea of having a food store seemed like fun. I was envisioning big platters of roast chicken and freshly baked cupcakes piled high, like having a big party every day with lots of good food, great music, and customers having a wonderful time. Running and operating Barefoot Contessa allowed me to share my love of food and cooking on a completely different scale. And Jeffrey was there again, nearly 20 years later, when I began to long for a new challenge and made the decision to sell Barefoot Contessa to the manager and the chef. The year that followed was the most difficult year of my life. I forced myself to go to my office every morning, but ended up spending more than a few days reading magazines or copying over my address book. One morning, as Jeffrey was leaving to go to New Haven, he was now the dean of the business school at Yale, and traveled back and forth between East Hampton and New Haven, Connecticut every week. He asked me what I planned to do that week. Exasperated, I said, "Nothing. I have nothing to do all week." Jeffrey smiled and gave me a great piece of advice. "You love the food business," he said. "Just stay in the game." At exactly the same time, my friend Susan Newbold decided to change her professional life as well. Susan had been an interior designer in Santa Barbara, California for decades, and also felt it was time to shake things up. She had moved to Connecticut to be with her new husband, and since neither of us had anything to do, we spent lots of time trying to figure out what to do next. I remember one day I said, "Let's figure out the parameters of what we want our new jobs to be." We came up with 4 criteria. First, we decided that we wanted to have no employees. Over the past 20 years, I had overseen between 50 and 100 people a year, and I didn't feel like solving anyone's boyfriend problems anymore. Second, we wanted to do something that we were passionate about, so our work didn't feel like work. Third, and of course, in order for it to be a business, we had to make a living doing it. And finally, and this was our private joke, we wanted businesses where we could drop everything at a moment's notice and go to Paris. At that point, Susan and I would be doubled over with laughter because, of course, that job didn't exist. Over the years, people have asked me to write a cookbook, but writing seemed so solitary, which was the opposite of what I loved about the store. The store felt like a party, and I was the hostess. Sitting at a computer all day didn't sound all that much fun. But when you have absolutely nothing to do, having something to do, anything, seems incredibly appealing. So instead of leafing through interior design magazines that day, I sat down and wrote a book proposal. The next day, I called the only agent I knew and asked if she would send my proposal to a cookbook editor my friends Lee Bailey and Martha Stewart had recommended. I was certain it would go nowhere, but at least it kept me busy for a few days. When the first publishers saw it, and they remain my publisher to this day, they accepted my proposal. I was terrified but also thrilled because not only had I finally found something to do, but because at 50 years old I was beginning to worry that my professional life was behind me. What I couldn't have known then is that in some ways my career hadn't even started yet. Those early days of cooking for Jeffrey and my many years running a specialty food store were actually just preparation for what I found to do and what my true passion was: writing cookbooks. When I look back at those days, I have to wonder if it's true that you can do anything that you can imagine. Susan Newbold became a successful artist. I work in a barn next to my home in East Hampton with two people I truly love. They are friends, not employees. I get up every morning and know that I get to do exactly what I want to do every day. And the best part is that, as Susan and I laughed about, she teaches art classes in France, and Jeffrey and I go to Paris often. How great is that? Cooking for Jeffrey is my 10th book, and I hope you'll enjoy it for the new recipes and because it's deeply personal. I've included many dishes that I have loved making for him over the years, as well as some inspired by the new ingredients and flavors I've discovered along the way. Many of the recipes I made during those early years I've updated for this book, such as tarragon shrimp, page 82. Brisket with onions and leeks, page 96. And shrimp and swordfish curry, page 124. Fresh corn pancakes, page 150. And fresh peach cobbler, page 235. Each one has been Jeffrey tested again and again. But frankly, I'm not sure that means much because Jeffrey seems to like everything I make for him. And that's exactly why I love to cook. What cooking for Jeffrey has taught me is the power of food. Cooking is one of the great gifts you can give to those you love. It says, you're important enough to me to spend the time and effort to cook for you. There is nothing more comforting than walking into a house that smells like there's a roast chicken, and onions, or a homemade apple pie in the oven. And when people show up around your table, you create a community of friends who take care of each other, which is, for me, the whole point of cooking. I think about this when I recall the last years of my dad's life. It was Thanksgiving, and he was at a particularly wonderful assisted living home in New Canaan, Connecticut, called Waveney. As he wasn't totally lucid at the time, it would have been very difficult to bring him home for Thanksgiving dinner. So, instead, I made a Thanksgiving dinner and brought it to him. I invited everyone close to him, of course my mom, who was living nearby, as well as the nurses and the aides. I started with my best linens and flowers for the table and served up roast turkey and gravy, lots of stuffing, and all kinds of traditional side dishes. For dessert, I brought his favorite pies and pumpkin mousse. I remember looking down that big table, filled with delicious things to eat and so many people having a wonderful time, in the middle of an assisted living home. My dad was sitting at the head of the table, like the happy host, with a huge grin on his face. It was a wonderful sight. He exclaimed, "It's a party!" At this point in his life, I'm not sure he knew who we all were, but he loved a party, and he had a wonderful time that day. That's what I'll always remember. It doesn't really matter what the occasion is, big or small, but it's the connections that we have with the people we love that nourish our souls. Entertaining isn't just about making dinner parties, it's about celebrating those connections, and I think that's what makes life worth living. I hope you and the people dearest to you love these recipes too. Well, thank you. I hope you'll join us again sometime for another dramatic cookbook reading. Until then,